You think cannabis is just a plant? Think again. What if I told you it's a mirror, not a medicine, not a menace, but a mirror held up to your soul? And most people, when they look into it, don't like what they see. Cannabis isn't just something you smoke. It's something that sees you. And most people aren't ready to be seen. For years, you've been bombarded with black and white labels. Cannabis is healing, they say. No, it's harmful. It's spiritual. No, it's sinful. It's painted as a cure or condemned as a curse. But all these opinions, all these arguments miss the real point because cannabis doesn't care what you believe about it. It doesn't fit neatly into your categories, your narratives, or your moral judgments. It doesn't bend to your expectations. It reveals them. It magnifies them. It reflects back what's already inside you. And that's precisely what makes it so powerful and so dangerous. In the ancient world, this plant wasn't for parties. It wasn't for likes. It wasn't for killing time. It was a spiritual instrument, a portal, a threshold to the self used not by the masses, but by the few who were prepared to meet themselves without distortion. No filters, no distractions, just raw, unfiltered awareness. Shamans used it not to decorate the ego, but to dismantle it. Mystics didn't use it to escape reality. They used it to pierce through illusion, to see clearly, to die, not physically, but psychologically. The ego had to die so the soul could awaken. But that sacred intention, it's been lost. Today, cannabis is everywhere, commercialized, packaged, marketed. It's sold like candy, smoked like fashion, worshipped like identity. What was once sacred ritual has become cultural routine. Reverence has been replaced with recreation. Ceremony has collapsed into consumption. And this video, this conversation isn't about whether weed is good or bad. That's too shallow a question. This is about what it does to your soul. Before it was ever rolled into cranes or served in dispensaries, it was handled with reverence. It was seen as a spiritual technology aligned with fasting, meditation, and solitude. In ancient India, it was an offering to Shiva, the god of destruction and transformation, the deity who burns illusion to reveal truth. His followers, the sadhus, didn't smoke for amusement. They smoked to dissolve themselves. The chillum wasn't a pipe. It was a prayer, a gateway to death, not of the body, but of the false self. In Taoist alchemy, cannabis was blended with herbs to refine energy, awaken subtle perception, and cultivate stillness. It wasn't about escape. It was about elevation, tuning into a higher frequency, one that required inner harmony. Ancient Chinese texts didn't describe cannabis as a party favor. They called it a spirit ally, one that would either sharpen your insight or throw you into chaos depending on your internal state. To the prepared, it was a gift. To the unprepared, it was a test. Sufi mystics used hashish not for intoxication, but as a sacrament in divine union. Yet even they were cautious. The poet Rumi warned of intoxication that mimics spiritual awakening moments, that feel profound but leave the soul unchanged. Because if the ego survives, the plant's power is misused. Among the Rastas, cannabis is ganja, the healing of the nations. But it's not about getting high. It's prayed over, brought into sacred reasoning circles. Smoke rises with words in communion with the divine. It is liturgy, not luxury, a tool for remembering, not forgetting the divine that lives within the world. But in the West, we've taken the sacrament and turned it into a sideshow. You can buy it at drive-thrus, light up between texts, scroll endlessly through distraction while your soul is quietly suffocating. The plant hasn't changed. We have. And without ritual, the plant loses its compass. When you remove intention, what's left is indulgence. And indulgence without guidance becomes distortion. The danger isn't in the herb itself. It's in treating something sacred as entertainment. Because cannabis doesn't offer direction, it offers amplification. If you're grounded, it can deepen you. If you're lost, it can scatter you further. It magnifies the maze. It doesn't guide, it reveals. And most people unknowingly walk into a spiritual temple with muddy feet, then wonder why they only see shadows. There are teachings, esoteric, Gnostic, Hermetic, that speak about cannabis in ways you'll never hear in mainstream circles. Because they don't reduce it to chemistry. They honor it as consciousness. We've covered some of that in our private newsletter, Insights Academy. If you're curious, check the link in the description. We've even included a free copy of the Kybalion for those ready to dive deeper, because the truth is, cannabis doesn't lead, it mirrors. And in that mirror, you'll see not just your light, but your shadows, your unresolved wounds, your buried pain, your unspoken questions. It strips the mask. It doesn't care about your vibe. It cares about your intention. That's why ancient traditions emphasize preparation, fasting, prayer, chanting, silence, cleansing, not superstition, discipline, because the mind must be still before it's stretched. The heart must be clean before it's cracked open. Used with reverence, cannabis isn't a drug. It's a door. But doors swing both ways. They open into the light and into the darkness. And the most dangerous illusion of all is thinking you can face both when you've prepared for neither. That's why so many report anxiety, panic, paranoia, that eerie feeling of being watched when they smoke, and they blame the strain, or the dose, or the THC levels. But what if it's not the plant? What if the plant is doing exactly what it was meant to do? Strip away your illusions, pull the curtain, show you what you've refused to face. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the repressed, rejected aspects of your psyche. Not evil, just hidden, waiting, watching, wanting to be acknowledged. And cannabis, it doesn't hide it anymore. So what happens when that mirror begins to reflect not just your light, but your pain? Not evil, but uncomfortable. Not harmful, but inconvenient. Cannabis doesn't create shadows. It simply shines a light on the ones already living inside you. It's not here to hurt you, but it's not here to comfort you either. The plant doesn't generate your grief, it reveals it. It doesn't manufacture your anxiety, it magnifies it. Like a speaker doesn't invent music, but amplifies whatever track is playing underneath, cannabis takes what's dormant in your soul and makes it louder. And for most people, what's playing beneath the surface is pain, grief left unprocessed, anger swallowed down for years, truths too raw, too complex to fully accept. These aren't dark forces. They're simply the parts of yourself you've never made peace with. And when the plant brings them to the surface, it can feel overwhelming. This is the side of cannabis no one wants to market because it doesn't sell well on a billboard. It doesn't vibe with the chill-out aesthetic. No one's lining up to buy introspection in a pre-roll. But ask anyone who's truly walked the spiritual path, really walked it. They'll tell you transformation doesn't begin in light. It begins in descent. It starts in the underworld, in discomfort, in confrontation with yourself. And cannabis, when used with respect, with presence, can serve as a guide into that shadowy terrain. But only if you're truly ready, only if you're willing to meet your reflection stripped of the mask. In mystical psychology, this moment is sacred. That raw exposure isn't breakdown, it's breakthrough. The anxiety creeping in after a puff, the sudden wave of self-consciousness, the paranoia, that's not dysfunction, that's feedback. Your system is responding to the collapse of filters that have long kept you from your truth. You're not losing control, you're losing illusion. What you feel is the ego's alarm bells ringing because the walls it built around your identity are being breached. The performance is unraveling. But here's the problem. Modern society has no structure to hold this kind of sacred disintegration. No elders, no shamans, no ritual space, no spiritual framework. Just you, alone, in your room, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, wondering why it feels like you're disappearing. And maybe it's because you are, but not in the way you think. You're not disappearing, you're dissolving the persona, the facade, the version of you you've curated and clung to. The plant doesn't destroy, it strips. And what it strips away is everything false. If you're not prepared, if you're expecting a good time and suddenly find yourself face to face with unresolved trauma, then yes, it feels like a nightmare. But it's not the plant that's wrong. It's the lack of preparation, the lack of integration. Ancient esoteric traditions knew this. Dion Fortune, a mystic and occultist, warned that altered states make the subtle body more porous, open not only to wisdom but to chaotic energetic interference. Without grounding, cannabis doesn't harmonize you. It amplifies the static. Everything comes to the surface. And while that may sound terrifying, it's also necessary because nothing can be healed if it stays hidden. But instead of staying with that discomfort, breathing through it, reflecting on it, we escape. We numb. We chase another high. And with each hit, the sacred becomes more ordinary, more noisy, until cannabis becomes just another tool of avoidance rather than a gateway to truth. That's why, despite being natural, cannabis isn't automatically safe. Nature doesn't promise safety, it promises truth. And the truth is the plant doesn't choose who is ready. It doesn't whisper warnings. It just opens the curtain. What you do with what's behind it is entirely up to you. Here's the trap assuming cannabis is supposed to make you feel better. That's the myth. That's the consumer fantasy. The truth, it's supposed to make you see better. And sometimes that clarity is painful. Every emotion it triggers pain, bliss, confusion is sacred data. Your spirit saying this, right here, look at this. Don't run, witness it. But we've been conditioned to associate discomfort with danger. And so we call these moments bad trips. Then we label them, discard them, and walk away unchanged. But here's the hard truth. Cannabis didn't give you anxiety. It showed you the anxiety that was already there, living in your nervous system, buried in your body, hiding behind your smile. The plant doesn't fabricate your inner world. It broadcasts it. And that makes cannabis one of the most brutally honest substances you'll ever meet. But honesty isn't always pleasant. And truth rarely comes dressed in comfort. Cannabis is a mirror. And sometimes what that mirror reflects is raw, messy, and uncomfortable. But maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what your soul has been begging to see. There's a dangerous illusion in the spiritual world. The trap of mistaking sensation for transformation. Cannabis, more than almost any other plant, tempts us into that falsehood. You light up, and suddenly the world feels rich. Colors deepen, music becomes holy. Your thoughts feel poetic. Synchronicities unfold. Your journal floods with revelations. And yes, these moments feel divine, mystical, important. But do they change you? That's the question most never ask. You may feel expanded, but expansion is not the same as integration. Feeling high is not the same as becoming whole. What the plant shows you during the experience must be anchored when the smoke clears. Otherwise, it's just another simulation of spirituality. And this is where the danger lies. Not in the body, but in the soul's misinterpretation. You start believing you've reached some kind of enlightenment just because you had a profound moment. But depth isn't measured by intensity. It's measured by what you carry back into your life, by how you live when the high fades. Many users report powerful breakthroughs, epiphanies about their trauma, a sense of cosmic unity, the magic of the present moment. These insights are real, but when they float ungrounded, when they're never processed, applied, or integrated, they become what mystics call spiritual inflation. It's not evolution, it's ego dressed in sacred language. In Hermetic and occult circles, this is known as the false light experiences that glow with brilliance but lack substance. In the Kabbalistic tree of life, it's the realm of Hod, the radiant intellect detached from lived reality. It sparkles like gold, but it crumbles like ash. You think you've seen the light? Maybe all you've seen is the mirror. And this is why over time, regular cannabis users can begin confusing insight with identity. They don't integrate the wisdom, they perform it. They start speaking in spiritual terms, quoting mystics, sounding awakened. But their relationships haven't changed. Their patterns haven't healed. Their life hasn't shifted because they mistook the feeling of awakening for the work of becoming. So what happens when the high doesn't translate into change, when deep realizations echo, but your life still looks the same? That's the next illusion, the performance of transformation. Your patterns haven't shifted. Your relationships haven't deepened. Your suffering's still present, just more poetic now. The words sound wiser. The emotions feel richer. But at the core, nothing's moved. The plant has become a prop, a beautiful backdrop to the theater of spiritual progress. Osho once said, substances open doors that only silence should open. He wasn't dismissing their power. He was cautioning us about their instability. Because a door forced open doesn't stay open for long. And if your mind isn't ready for what's behind it, that sudden rush of revelation can blur more than it clarifies. You think you've seen truth, but maybe you've only felt something intensely. That's the danger, not in the plant itself, but in the pedestal you build beneath your experience. Cannabis can become a stage, a place where you rehearse enlightenment instead of living it, where you look down from the high and feel above those who haven't seen what you've seen. But here's the honest question. Have you really seen anything clearly, or just felt something deeply? Insight alone is not the problem. Insight without embodiment is. Yes, cannabis can absolutely shift your perspective. It can open inner windows that were rusted shut. But unless what you see becomes how you live, it's not transformation. It's stimulation. And stimulation, no matter how mystical it feels, can be a trap. If it doesn't teach you how to face conflict, how to hold your shadow, how to respond to suffering, how to love deeper, forgive faster, and serve better, then it's just spiritual decoration. And that's where the danger lies, not in the smoke, not in the plant, but in the story you wrap around it. The story that says, I'm growing when all that's growing is your tolerance. The high isn't the truth, it's a threshold. But if you spend your life standing in the doorway mistaking access for arrival, you never enter the room. You never anchor, you never build. And worse, you start craving that doorway, chasing the illusion of movement instead of doing the hard, silent work of change. You become addicted not to cannabis, but to the feeling of progress. And that illusion is harder to detox from than any chemical. That's why true spiritual traditions never glorified the high. They used it as a pointer, not a destination. They didn't celebrate the vision, they interrogated it. They asked, what does this demand of me now? Because real awakening doesn't happen on the plant. It happens after, in the silence that follows, in the everyday choices that shape who you become, in the humility to admit that one mystical night doesn't mean you've arrived. Cannabis offers access, not arrival. And what the world needs now isn't more access. It needs anchors, grounded people, present people, people who don't just visit the sacred in moments of ecstasy, but carry it into moments of boredom, conflict, and everyday struggle. People who don't just feel the truth, but live it. Because cannabis doesn't just touch your brain, it touches your subtle body, the invisible architecture of your being, the energy field that holds your thoughts, your traumas, your memories, your hopes, your unresolved pain. You can't see it, but you can feel it. And when cannabis enters that field, it doesn't knock. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It moves in and begins to amplify everything that's already there. For some, that amplification brings clarity, intuition, sensitivity, and presence. For others, it unleashes chaos. That chaos isn't random. It's the reverberation of energy that was already trapped inside you, vibrating under the surface, waiting to be released. Imagine your subtle body as a musical instrument. When it's tuned, cannabis can be the bow drawing, resonance awakening harmony, even ushering in sacred silence. But if that instrument is out of tune, dusty, or broken, the same bow will only create dissonance, confusion, noise. And in that noise, many confuse intensity for insight. You feel more, but you're not necessarily seeing more. You're just louder inside. And when your inner space is crowded, clarity is drowned out. True spiritual traditions understood this. They practiced what's now being called energetic hygiene. And no, it's not a new age buzzword. It's spiritual responsibility. Just like you shower to cleanse your body, you must clear your energy. Practices like fasting, breath work, chanting, cold exposure prayer, and sacred silence. They're not extra. They're foundational. They prepare the space. They cleanse the instrument. So when the plant enters, it meets a room that's ready, not cluttered with emotional debris. In Reiki and other energy healing modalities, cannabis is sometimes seen as a field disruptor. Not because it's bad, but because it spikes sensitivity. It can heighten awareness of subtle energy, but if you're not grounded, that awareness becomes overload. Sessions turn chaotic. Focus disappears. Sensation increases, but control evaporates. Kundalini work says the same. Cannabis can awaken dormant energy. But if your body, your breath, your nervous system isn't prepared, it's like sending a lightning bolt into a glass lamp. You feel lit until you shatter. You feel expansive until you spiral. You open up, but can't close back down. Amazonian shamans have a saying, every plant opens, but every plant tests. Cannabis is no exception. They believe each plant has a spirit, a frequency, a consciousness. And when that spirit enters your field, it speaks, not in words, but in sensations, emotions, memories. If you are clean, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, you can receive that message. If you're not, the message scrambles. The plant doesn't distort the truth. Your residue does. And instead of clarity, you get confusion wearing the costume of insight. That's why so many report feeling drained, foggy, emotionally raw after heavy use. It's not that cannabis is inherently draining, it's that you stepped into its field without preparation. No clearing, no containment, no reverence. It's like plugging a delicate violin into a broken amplifier with frayed wires. You don't get music, you get static. And the more you expose yourself to that distortion, the more your sensitivity degrades. You begin to lose the capacity to feel the sacred. Everything becomes flat, overstimulated, dull. Cannabis interacts with your energy like fire interacts with dry forest. It spreads, it consumes, it can illuminate, but only if the space is clean. If not, it just burns. And without grounding, without clarity, without intention, what was meant to elevate begins to fragment. You lose focus. You lose momentum. You live in a fog that feels peaceful, but underneath it's a dull kind of spiritual stagnation. And here's the subtle danger. You start to mistake that fog for calm. You begin to think numbness is healing, that silence is peace, but healing is not the absence of sensation, it's the return of clarity, of aliveness. Healing is reclaiming power, not sedating it. And cannabis, when used without reverence or preparation, doesn't resolve imbalance. It masks it. It puts a velvet curtain over your chaos and calls it enlightenment. But underneath, the mess remains. So if the plant didn't lose its sacredness, maybe we lost the ritual that made it sacred. And that loss has changed everything, not because cannabis became weaker, but because our preparation became absent. The question now becomes, is your inner system clean enough for clarity? Have you swept the floors of your mind, cleared the emotional clutter, purified your intentions before you invite the spirit of cannabis into your space? Because cannabis doesn't do the cleaning for you. It simply turns on the lights. And what you see in that light depends entirely on what was already there. Once upon a time, the herb wasn't touched until the soul was ready. Now it's used because the weekend's here. It's the end of the work week, not the beginning of a sacred quest. What used to be a sacred rite has become a Friday night habit. The transition didn't happen in an instant. It unfolded slowly and visibly and disguised itself as progress. What was once holy became symbolic. What was once intentional became impulsive. And somewhere along the way, we stopped using the plant to elevate the spirit and started using it to decorate the moment. We shifted from spiritual seekers to content consumers. And in that shift, cannabis didn't lose its potency. We lost our ability to hold it with reverence. In the Rastafarian tradition, cannabis was never something to be consumed alone in a bedroom while numbing stress. It was integrated into reasoning sessions, sacred communal gatherings for deep philosophical and spiritual dialogue. The herb was not inhaled in isolation. It rose with prayers, with chants, with drums, with rhythm, with reverent breath. The smoke wasn't for sedation, it was for alignment. Alignment with Jah, with God, with Source, with the One. And if your heart wasn't clean, the herb would show you. It didn't provide escape. It initiated confrontation. It was never entertainment, it was initiation. In Afro-Brazilian spiritual systems like Candomblé and Umbanda, cannabis wasn't always central, but the worldview behind it spoke volumes. Every plant holds an axe, a spirit, a vibration, a frequency, a purpose. To misuse a plant was to misuse its energy. To do that was to invite imbalance, disruption, not only within yourself, but within the spiritual field around you. The ritual dictated the experience. The ceremony created the safety. Sacred tools weren't used casually, they were earned through preparation, devotion, humility. There was no such thing as just smoking, there was only communion. But our modern world, it doesn't value that kind of time. Rituals are inconvenient, and convenience is the lifeblood of consumerism. So the plant was removed from its spiritual context. It was sanitized, rebranded, packaged for profit, marketed like green incense wrapped in Instagram-friendly colors and lifestyle slogans. This will make you feel better, they say. No mention of shadow. No mention of mirrors. Just mood boards, wellness aesthetics, pastel fonts, and vague references to mindfulness. The sacred was erased. The ceremony was deleted. And cannabis became a product, not a portal. Now people light up in front of Netflix numbing themselves while binging shows designed to hijack attention and feed addiction. They scroll endlessly on social media wrapped in smoke, swiping through content engineered for dopamine spikes and spiritual decay. No chanting, no circle, no silence. Just stimulation layered on top of stimulation. And in that layered chaos, the plant becomes fog. Not fire, numbness, not clarity. Even festivals that claim to be spiritual, full of incense, ecstatic music, and chakra merchandise, often reduce the plant to background noise. Ritual becomes costume. Ceremony becomes performance. And the essence of cannabis, the part that could disrupt, awaken, transform, gets buried under piles of aesthetics. But cannabis has no interest in your aesthetic. Its spirit is ancient, wild, unfiltered, unbranded. It doesn't care about your logo, your follower count, or how pretty your ritual looks on video. It cares about your intention. And without a sacred container, the energy spills. It leaks into your distractions, your avoidance patterns, your wounds. It amplifies the exact frequency you bring to it. That's why some people feel inspired after smoking, while others feel fragmented, foggy, or stuck. The plant hasn't changed, but the vessel it's entering has. So when we stripped away the ritual, we stripped away the framework that made the experience sacred. And without that framework, all we're left with is a mimicry, a hollow echo, a performance of healing. Cannabis became entertainment dressed as awakening. The plant still carries power, but we've stopped preparing ourselves to receive it. The ritual was never for the gods, it was for you, to center you, to humble you, to cleanse your mind, your body, your spirit. So when the herb opened the door, you could step through with clarity, not chaos, with presence, not panic. We didn't lose the sacred, we just stopped recognizing it. And here lies one of the most dangerous lies of modern spirituality, that intention alone is enough. That if you mean well, the plant will respond kindly. But cannabis, like any true spiritual ally, doesn't respond to sentiment, it responds to energy, to your readiness, to the integrity of your inner world, not to your hashtags or hopes. Too many seekers approach it with curiosity, but no compass. They light up to relax, to go deeper, to escape boredom, to soften anxiety, but they forget the plant doesn't give you peace. It reveals whether peace was already there. Used with discipline, cannabis can be a profound ally. It can help peel away the layers of ego, help you see your behavioral patterns with shocking clarity, help you soften the internal dialogue that keeps you in loops. But the key is never in the plant itself. The key is who you are when you meet it. Without structure, the experience becomes slippery. Without reflection, the insight fades. Without grounding, openness turns to fragmentation. So how do you use the plant without being used by it? You begin by not reaching for it first. If you feel anxious, don't smoke. Sit, listen, and ask yourself, what is this anxiety trying to tell me? If you're restless, don't flee, move your body. Stretch, breathe deeply. Let the body speak before you override it. Write, reflect. Only when the mind is clear and the body is calm can cannabis act as a tool of refinement rather than disruption. Before lighting up, ask yourself, what am I truly seeking right now? Clarity or comfort, awakening or escape, truth or temporary relief? Am I reaching from a place of alignment or avoidance? Because there's a vast sacred difference between using cannabis to explore consciousness and using it to mute what consciousness is trying to tell you. So the question isn't just how you use the plant, it's who you are when you do, and whether you're prepared to carry the truth it reveals into the life you live after the smoke clears. There's a world of difference between sacred use and unconscious habit. One elevates, the other loops. The deepest traditions, the wisest lineages never relied on cannabis alone. It was never the main act. It was one piece in a vast spiritual ecosystem, a single instrument in a larger symphony. Fasting, silence, chanting, prayer, breathwork, cleansing rituals. These weren't outdated customs. They were spiritual hygiene. Practices to clear the vessel, to quiet the mind, to stabilize the nervous system and prepare the field. Without them, the plant can't do its deeper work. It just bounces off the noise. Grounding matters. Stillness matters. Silence matters. When you engage cannabis, let it guide you inward, not outward. Turn off the phone, sit on the earth, ditch the background music. Let the smoke rise like incense, not distraction. Watch your breath. Listen to the space between your thoughts. Write down what comes through. Reflect. Then most importantly, integrate. Take what you've seen and translate it into how you move through the world, into how you speak, how you forgive, how you show up for others when it's hard. That's where the alchemy begins. Not in what you saw, but in what you do with what you saw. Because without integration, cannabis becomes just another form of spiritual entertainment. You're not growing, you're just chasing the feeling. You start confusing the plant with your own depth as if you can't access truth without it. And that's where dependency creeps in, not chemical, but existential. You forget that cannabis is only a mirror. It reflects but the depth that was always inside you. The herb didn't create your wisdom. It just made it visible. The real journey begins when you learn to return to that state of clarity without the plant. When stillness becomes familiar. When peace isn't a chemical reaction, but a practiced state of being. You're not meant to live inside the high. You're meant to bring what you found there back with you into your marriage, your friendships, your work, your routines. The insight is not the goal. The application is the transformation. Can you be compassionate when you don't feel euphoric? Can you remain present in traffic and boredom, in conflict without help? Can you keep your heart open in the ordinary, the mundane, the messy? This is the true measure of integration. This is how you use the plant without losing yourself to it. By remembering that cannabis is a tool, not your source, a guide, not your God. The plant may open the door, but only you can walk the path. And if you're not walking, you're just circling, feeling more, learning nothing. You don't need more highs, you need more honesty, the kind that cuts through your illusions, the kind that asks the hard questions, is this helping me grow? Or just helping me hide? Cannabis was never meant to be used in isolation. Across centuries, cultures, and sacred lineages, its spiritual use was almost always collective. Not because individuals couldn't access altered states, but because those who understood the plant knew without a container, power becomes unpredictable. And without community, insight turns into distortion. The plant might open you, but it's the circle that holds you. In the Rastafari tradition, cannabis isn't smoked as a pastime. It's part of reasoning sessions, gatherings steeped in reverence, discussion, scripture, chanting, and the conscious pursuit of divine alignment. The herb moves clockwise, like time, like energy, like the sacred spiral of life. Silence is honored. Words are shared with weight. Each person becomes both student and teacher. In that space, cannabis is not the focus. It is the bridge between people, between the self and the divine, between thought and truth. The plant doesn't provide revelation, it prepares you for it. The same principle holds true among many indigenous cultures. In Amazonian and Central African traditions, even if cannabis isn't the centerpiece like ayahuasca or tobacco, the rules are the same, the altered states are sacred. Substances are not consumed in isolation, but within the structure of ritual, the guidance of elders, the safety of community, the presence of spirit. You don't journey alone. Even when your eyes are closed, the circle holds you. The fire, the song, the prayer, the silence, the ancestors. They hold you. Because the insight is not just yours, it belongs to the community. It belongs to the whole. When you return, it is the elders who help interpret the vision. It is the shared space that helps determine what was real and what was just projection. Now contrast that with how cannabis is often used today. A joint in one hand, a phone in the other, no silence, no sacred space, no integration, just endless scrolling, just another layer of simulation. What was once a tool of awakening becomes an engine of dissociation. And that's where the spiral begins. You're cracked open, but there's no one to help you close. The insight doesn't become wisdom. It fragments into scattered memories. You begin to think you've found something profound, but there's no mirror, no elder, no challenge, no witness. And so you build a private religion around half-formed thoughts and disconnected realizations. You confuse loneliness for enlightenment, But when you're in a real circle, something changes. You're seen, you're heard, you're reminded that what you experienced is part of something bigger, that your breakthrough matters not just for you, but for the collective, that you are now responsible for the vision. Because the plant doesn't just give, it asks. It asks, what will you do with this? Will you live differently? Will you serve more fully? Will you embody what you saw or just talk about it? In a sacred circle, ego has no place to hide. You can't pretend to be awakened when someone sees right through the performance. You can't claim transformation when you're being held to it. There's no room for illusion in real ceremony. And that's what makes it work, because it's not about how the plant makes you feel. It's about how the experience is witnessed. The circle guards the truth. It prevents the illusion from turning into personal doctrine. When you're alone, everything you feel seems true. But not everything that feels true is truth. Not every idea that arises in the high is sacred. Some are projections. Some are ego in disguise. Some are just static. The circle helps you discern. It holds the vision up to the light of shared reality. It filters the signal from the noise. And even in modern life, even in big cities, busy apartments, and digital spaces, you can still build that container. You can still form that circle. You just have to be intentional. So if the plant opens the door, it's not the smoke that matters, it's what you do once you're on the other side. And without structure, community, or reflection, even sacred smoke gets lost in the wind. A few friends, candles lit, phones turned off, a shared intention spoken aloud, a circle formed not out of formality but out of reverence, a moment of silence before and another after. Not just to trip, not just to escape, but to transform. You don't need a jungle. You don't need a temple. You need presence. You need a ritual. You need people who can hold the space with you. Without that, cannabis drifts through your life like incense in a windy room, fragrant, beautiful, but directionless, dispersed before it ever settles. The plant's spirit is ancient and potent. Like any true power, it amplifies whatever it touches. In a collective container, it can magnify clarity, healing vision, presence. But in isolation and distraction, in ungrounded use, it can amplify confusion, inflate ego, stir illusions, and deepen disconnection. So maybe the question isn't just, what are you smoking for, but who are you smoking with? Because the presence or absence of a sacred structure determines whether the plant becomes your guide or just another excuse to check out. There comes a moment in every seeker's path when the thrill begins to wear thin. The fireworks of the high start to dim. The visions echo familiar messages. The insights begin to repeat themselves. That's not failure. That's the signal. That's when the deeper path begins, not with more intensity, but with more honesty. Because the real work is never in what you see when you're high. It's in what you do when you're sober. It's how you apply the wisdom, not just how you chase it. Discernment becomes the new high, not stimulation, not escape, but clarity, not euphoria, but alignment. Cannabis has always been able to open doors. That's never been the issue. But opening a door is easy. Walking through it consciously, humbly, courageously, that's the part we avoid. Because it's far easier to feel awakened than to be awakened. It's easier to light up than to sit still. Easier to feel something than to embody it. But not everything you feel is truth, and not everything you see is real. That's why discernment is everything. It's the sacred blade that cuts through illusion. In ancient Greek thought, it was called krino, the ability to judge rightly, to sift signal from noise. In Vedanta, it was viveka, the power to distinguish between the real and the unreal. This isn't about being skeptical. It's about becoming spiritually mature, about having the courage to question even your most profound experiences. To ask yourself, is this truth or just what I wanted to hear? Because cannabis will give you both. It speaks in symbols, emotions, poetry, riddles. But if you're not grounded, you'll start building belief systems out of metaphors. You'll take metaphor for gospel, feeling for fact. And that's where spiritual inflation begins. The ego rebrands itself as awakened. It starts quoting scripture, wearing mystic vocabulary like robes. It speaks in transcendental language, but never changes its life. It becomes addicted not to the plant, but to the sensation of feeling special. It stops listening. It stops being teachable. That's why discernment must come before devotion, because without it, you're not opening up to higher truth. You're just redecorating your delusion. You're rearranging the same mental furniture and calling it a temple. Cannabis only amplifies what's already inside you. If you carry confusion, it expands. If you carry clarity, it deepens. The plant doesn't have bias. It doesn't discriminate. It reflects. So the question becomes, are you willing to sharpen your inner blade? Are you willing to ask hard questions about your own intentions, your expectations, your habitual patterns? Are you willing to set the plant down, not because it's wrong, but because it's no longer needed? That might be the greatest test of all, to not use the plant when you don't need it. To realize that the real wisdom was never in the herb, but in what the herb helped you remember. Cannabis isn't the path, it's a compass. It can point, it can remind, but it cannot walk the way for you, and it certainly cannot carry you. The plant holds a mirror, but a mirror doesn't create, it doesn't move. You do. And if you fall in love with the reflection, if you mistake the mirror for the message, you forget what it was meant to show you in the first place. This is the threshold many never cross. They stop at sensation. They stop at poetry. But the true seekers, the mystics, the ones who walk the talk, they go further. They learn to trust the quiet after the high. They learn to listen for the truths that don't come wrapped in euphoria. They learn to sit in discomfort and ask it, what are you here to teach me? Because the goal is never to stay high. The goal is to stay awake. Not just when the plant opens your senses, but when the alarm goes off in the morning. When you return to work, to conflict, to the ordinary. Can you still be clear, still be present, still be real? That's the spiritual practice. That's the path beyond the smoke, beyond illusion, beyond aesthetics. At some point, every seeker must put the tools down. Every shortcut must be surrendered. Every high must be questioned for what it really was. Not a destination, not a crown, but a spark, a beginning. Cannabis was never the answer. It was never meant to be. At its best, it is a teacher. At its worst, it becomes another illusion depth in disguise. And if you're really listening, truly listening, you'll know when it's time to stop chasing the smoke and start building the fire within. Because the most powerful truth cannabis can offer you is that you never needed it. Not because it was empty, but because its purpose was always to remind you of something ancient and alive inside you. Something waiting to be remembered. The clarity that was yours. The stillness yours. The insight, the awe, the connection. All of it was already within you. The plant just peeled back the noise long enough for you to see it. But seeing is not the end. Becoming is. The journey begins not with what you experienced, but with what you choose to do now. That's why the ancients never worshiped the plant. They respected it. They didn't chase the high, they honored the integration. The ceremony ended and the real work began. So what happens after the smoke clears, after the visions fade? The true test begins, not in the silence of the ceremony, but in the noise of everyday life. You took what the plant revealed, and you turned it into something real. You moved through conflict differently, not with reactivity, but with presence. You listened more than you spoke. You responded from stillness instead of impulse. You loved not to be loved back, but because something in you had expanded. You stopped needing conditions. You started serving not for approval, but from a deeper well of purpose. That's the point. That's always been the point. Because what's the use of vision if it doesn't change how you live? What good is insight if it stays trapped in your journal or only appears under candlelight? The real work isn't measured by what you saw under the stars. It's measured by how you show up when life feels dull, chaotic, or inconvenient. It's easy to feel spiritual when the smoke is thick and the world is silent. But can you still feel aligned in a traffic jam? Can you stay grounded when your heart breaks, when your plans fall apart, when the routine feels endless and uninspired? That's where real spiritual growth happens, not on the mountain, but in the valley. Not in the altered state, but in the grocery store. In hard conversations. In long, unremarkable afternoons. In your reactions, your habits, your patterns. In how you carry yourself through the repetition of ordinary life. Integration isn't glamorous. It isn't psychedelic. It doesn't post well on social media. It's quiet. humble, and sometimes boring. It's discipline. It's the invisible act of following through, of knowing when the ceremony ends and choosing to let life become the new one. It's choosing to close the ritual door and open your front door to walk out into the world and live differently. That is what the plant asks of you. Not worship, not dependency, but embodiment. You were never meant to orbit the teacher forever. You were meant to graduate. You're not here to endlessly circle meaning. You're here to embody it, to ground it, to turn fragments of truth into daily practice, into the way you speak, the way you listen, the way you carry yourself when no one is watching. That's where the plant becomes legacy, not just something you smoked, but something that shaped you. Not a high you chased, but a mirror you faced again and again until you finally saw something real staring back. And here's what's real. The sacred doesn't need cannabis. The sacred is already inside you. The question is, are you willing to live like it? Are you willing to stop chasing signals outside yourself and start transmitting them from within? This isn't the end of the conversation. Not if you've made it this far. If you're still here, still listening, then you're not just searching for sensation. You're seeking something deeper, something lasting, something true. And that's exactly why we created Insights Academy for people like you, for seekers who want more than peak experiences, for those ready to study, to live, to embody timeless wisdom. Sign up for the free newsletter using the link in the description. When you do, you'll receive a digital copy of the Kybalion, not as a gift, but as a tool, because some teachings can't be captured in a single video. Some must be walked, wrestled with, lived out over time, because in the end, this was never about the plant. It's about you, not about what you smoke, but what you become. Not about how high you get, but how deeply you walk through your lows. The plant gave you a glimpse, a fleeting vision of what's possible. But now it's your turn to stop chasing the light and start becoming it. So if this message resonated with something in you deeply, clearly, honestly, leave a comment below and write, "I understood it." Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is simply, "I understand."